Hey, how's it going? Welcome to the Football Diary podcast. It's the final weekend of the Premier League season. All the drama has been finalised and wrapped up. What drama, you might ask? Yeah, there wasn't that much on the final day, was there, to be fair? Manchester City are Premier League champions again for the fourth time in a row. We'll be discussing the sporting merit of their achievement and also any other asterisks that may apply to Man City's title win. Arsenal as well, what the impact has on their season and what that looks like for them going forward. And all the other things that have been finalised throughout the league. And a few highlights on the final day, including Crystal Palace beating Aston Villa and many, many more. But that is it for this Premier League season. It's been an interesting one, Miles. The final day didn't quite give us the drama that we normally expect with a Premier League season, and the title came to the wire. But as soon as Man City went 1-0 up against West Ham, that Phil Foden goal, it felt like it was pretty much over before it even started, didn't it, really?
Yeah, and I think Man City have been here enough times before to know what they needed to do, and it was just a professional performance, wasn't it? I think coming off the back of Foden obviously winning Player of the Year, for him to step up in that moment and just start the game in that manner, it took all the sting out of the game. And what you don't want on big occasions like that is for the narrative to keep spiraling. Like if it had been 0-0 going into half time, then things start to panic. If West Ham had got a goal, then all of a sudden there's a bit more tension on the line. So they did what they needed to do, which is exactly what you expect of Man City at the end of a season, typically. The final day has been a challenge for them in the past, if not one they've overcome always. But this one, they made sure that there was never any doubt. And that you have to give them credit for that.
Well, Man City fans will argue that it's not been a foregone conclusion winning the title this season because they weren't on top for the majority. I think it was Arsenal for the most part. Liverpool had their spell as well, and they only really nicked it really at the end, didn't they, Dave? And you kind of felt that their momentum was building like it always does after, I think probably they went to the Club World Cup and came back from that victorious. It felt like it was a reset moment for them. And since the new year, they've not only kept pace with Arsenal, but then overtaken them at the key moments. I feel like City have built their season, especially the running, Dave, on key moments as well. And Phil Foden's been kind of central to that, hasn't he? He scored that goal quite early on in the game, then followed that up quickly with a second to kill any hope that Arsenal had that West Ham might make a huge recovery. And City have done that so many times, haven't they? And in many ways, that's kind of the mark of a champion, isn't it?
I think that's why it's so important. They've got all these players that can be decisive in vital moments, and we've seen it Foden do it actually numerous times this season. I think that's an area of his game where he's really stepping up. He's actually realised, I think, his potential as a match winner and scoring these goals at important times. And I mean, you know, with the summer coming, let's hope he can start doing that for England, because I think that's where he's not been able to replicate that kind of form on the international stage. Let's hope so.
Yeah, well, player of the season, Phil Foden as well. And we can argue, and we probably will argue about whether that's deserved and whether there's any more worthy candidates later in the pod. But Man City's sporting achievement, Miles, that's 4 titles in a row. And there are many asterisks against Man City. And until they're resolved, we'll talk about in a moment why that's difficult to kind of enjoy exactly how good Man City are. But looking at the way they play, and even on a season that's meant to be one of their off seasons this year, they've still managed to produce a huge amount of points. Getting over that 90-point mark is massive still, isn't it? They've lost some key players, but their talent ID has always been so good. I mean, even Ortega stepping in goals, it felt like almost an upgrade on Ederson at times because of the way he played. And they've done that so well this season, City, haven't they?
Yeah, I think the ability to reinvent a team to keep going again and again and again is huge, particularly when you consider that a lot of the records that we talk about only exist within the Premier League era, but we're talking about one in British football history, which is just incredible.
Yeah.
I think this side in particular, there was that patch at the start of the season where you started to think, actually, this could be someone else's year. Like you mentioned earlier about Arsenal and Liverpool having time on the top of the league, even Spurs did. And towards the back end of the season, the ability to shift the squad and players like Guardiola, who had some time to settle into the side and readapt, that was huge. At the start of the season, they were putting a lot of kind of hope into Jeremy Doku, and then he kind of came out of the side, and Foden shone through, as we mentioned. De Bruyne came back from that injury, and that took them over. And that squad is just full of incredibly talented players that are being moulded to reach their potential. And that can't be underestimated. We'll come on to talk later about how Arteta has really got Arsenal to the next level. We'll talk about Klopp and him kind of leaving this legacy at Liverpool. And yet Guardiola has only dropped the title once in his entire reign at City now in 7 years, and 4 in a row. The fact that no one's ever achieved that. For all our talk of England and the Premier League being the best league in the world, to come in and do that and have that kind of dominance can't be underestimated. No matter what the conversation around the money and the irregularities are, it's still an incredible coaching achievement and sporting achievement for the players.
Well, obviously, regular listeners will know that myself and Dave are Manchester United fans. Talking about City and celebrating their achievements is never easy. And I think in the past, as a United fan, when I've seen rivals come for United at their best, when we've seen the Arsenal sides of the Wenger era achieve the title, there's been a real respect for what they've done because it's been an organic growth, and you could argue that City's growth isn't as organic. So it's difficult to kind of ignore that in some ways. However, looking at the way City play, the way the whole model identifies talent, and their recruitment has been superb for a decade now, hasn't it? You have to kind of look on admiringly and go, and that's how you run a football club if you have the resources. And David, you've got to kind of almost admit really that United have kind of highlighted their failings so much more by just how well run City are.
There's some things I think Miles mentions there about players reaching their potential. I think also it might hamper certain players as well. We mentioned earlier in the season, I said about Jack Grealish and whether he's evolved as a player. He's definitely evolved, and he's changed into a player that fits their system, perfectly. But actually, a lot of his outstanding abilities on the ball have been stripped back a little bit, and somewhat for me. I could see that happening with Doku. Doku, was a player of massive promise coming to this league. I think he's got a lot of raw potential there that can be moulded, but I think he will probably suit a team better that don't dominate the ball, haven't always got a hold of possession, where he can actually expose defences on the break, which City don't really do, let's be honest.
Yeah. So, as true as that is, and there's that element of wide players maybe having that consideration, I think you only have to look at the rest of the squad and see the development of them to go, yeah, fair play. Like, look at Foden. Foden's a perfect example. This year, he's the main man at Man City. And for how long was there question marks over Phil Foden's kind of management at Man City? Like, there was always that talk of, Guardiola's not using him enough. Guardiola doesn't trust him enough. He's got 6 Premier League titles already. And then you compare that to someone like Cole Palmer, who Guardiola was quite happy to move on. You clearly see that there was always a plan for Foden. It was never a case of, right, shift him off somewhere else. Let me nurture him instead and shape him into this player. Gvardiol becoming a left back this season. Look at Akanji and Ake and the way they've had to adapt from being just regular centre backs. There is definitely a development of those players to make them better footballers, and that's why Man City are able to kick on. You can argue about the wages that they pay some of these players, but in terms of like transfer fees, Guardiola's was high. But generally speaking, Man City, other than him and Grealish, they don't go and spend loads of money on a player. They kind of identify who they need and they can bring up to that next level. And that is impressive, regardless of what kind of goes on in the background.
Well, Pep Guardiola is always quick to sort of say how much money United have spent in the same period of time that he's been there and how much Liverpool and Arsenal have spent. And it is about that recruitment and talent ID. And they've generally paid the right amount of money for the right player in the right position. And it's incredible that they can keep doing that. And you can see United now kind of trying to follow suit by getting the right people at the top of the game and in the boardroom and in the scouting and development roles. And they want to try and replicate the way City work. And 15 years ago, that's just unthinkable, isn't it, that United would have to do that? But they've adapted really well to having wealth and having approaching modern football in the way that you've kind of got to these days. And there's not many clubs in world football that do it as well as them, apart from maybe Real Madrid, who obviously have scouted South America really, really well, and got people like Jude Bellingham in as they're approaching their prime. And City are probably up there with Real Madrid as probably one of the best scouting teams for elite players and potential elite players up there. And the fees they pay aren't that ridiculous. It's just infuriating that they can do it. And that's the elephant in the room. And that's what I want to address now as football fans. And the majority of our viewers and listeners won't be Man City fans, I don't think. From what we see, people that we interact with, it's kind of fans of clubs like Everton and Crystal Palace and Fulham, and it's middle to lower Premier League fans of teams, those teams that kind of watch us. And I think we speak for them in some ways to say that it's hard to ignore their achievements without looking at the decade that went before this Guardiola era and saying did they fudge their accounts to get to this position? Is it an advantageous position that's been gained illegally? Until the Premier League kind of answer that question, Dave, there's not really a way we can celebrate this as neutrals. It's just kind of looked on with suspicion, isn't it?
I think the one thing I don't like about it is that there are teams in the league. Obviously, we have a lot of Forest fan watching our channel, and I think how they've been allowed to be punished while these charges hang over Manchester City and the show's allowed to go on. And you look at the season that Arsenal have had, for instance, and many teams over the last few years have come so close to getting a Premier League title and missing out. And it could be so different. You look at Everton and Forest having those point deductions. If City are guilty, this is looming over them, and we're just the show's being allowed to just play out, and there's so much sort of unknowing there of what is actually happening, and it almost, reading quite a few things today about it's getting a bit more political, which I don't like, and that obviously the UK government are potentially being influenced by the UAE, etc. These things you read. If that is how it's all becoming, then it's where do we go?
It's not what football should be about. Yeah, you're right. It's the political side of it, and even nation states being involved in football clubs is a whole other debate. And I think that sits uneasy to an extent. But then, what wealth do you need, and who has the wealth to buy a club like United, for example, or City or PSG? Because you're talking billions of pounds now.
I think the thing is as well, all this coming out, obviously the Super League was going on obviously a couple of years ago. I mean, can you blame clubs if they're looking to, obviously get inside into a league where there isn't this apparent corruption? I think it's
well, there would be. It'd just be someone else.
Awful to see happening.
I mean, look at Everton. Obviously, they've had their struggles this year. They've had the points deductions twice. And then it looked like they'd got new owners on board who are now in administration, and they own or have shares in so many clubs that are now under even more threat. Imagine if that had been Everton. They've just recovered from that financial position, and then someone else comes in and makes it worse. So the league has got a lot of work to do to get those things right. I would start with working out what to do with Man City. But we could have this conversation, and then what will probably happen is they'll all get wiped off and we'll move on like nothing ever happened. We'll all know, but I can't see there being an outcome where City are stripped of their titles, given a points deduction, whatever, because you're right, it's not advantageous for the league to see one of its most profitable outlets and one of its most stylish teams.
Where do football fans go from there as well?
They just keep watching the game. But let's be honest, Dave, it's not going to stop anyone watching. Yeah. No one's turning off from their team. No Man City Man City fan stopped their celebrations early yesterday, went, oh, hang on a minute though. No one cares as long as there's results coming in. And I'm a Villa fan. Yeah, of course, I think it's mental that Man City are getting away with those sort of things. But ultimately, when Villa are on the pitch, I'm watching Villa, I'm not really thinking about Man City. And it's the same for the majority. That's why they can get away with it.
I don't know. I mean, you saw, I know it's a completely different situation, but obviously when United got taken over by the Glazers all those years ago, you had a lot of fans break away, and obviously, FC United came through. I think it will put off a lot of fans. I think there's more than you think.
It's not enough, though. It's a loud voice from a small minority. That's the problem.
As football fans, though, we look for romance, we look for stories, we look for underdog tales, we look for teams that are not buying success, that they're achieving it through, organic hard work and smart recruitment. And when we see a story like the likes of Luton almost kind of staying in the Premier League despite working on a shoestring budget, and you see the likes of Brentford being in the Premier League for a few years in a row now, and they were stuck in the EFL for ages. Their stories, Brighton until this season were competing for Europe and we're in Europe. They're all stories that you want to see as football fans. Dominance in any league is not healthy, is it? And I think when the dominance is in your league and it's from a club that have literally almost come out of nowhere in terms of their success, because prior to 2008, they were struggling, Man City. All of a sudden, they're at the top of our game and winning it 4 times in a row. It's a remarkable climb. and it doesn't feel organic or romantic at all. And I think that's the worrying thing for football fans is we're kind of numb to Man City's success. Whereas what you see on the pitch is actually quite impressive. They're playing brilliant football. And Guardiola is a very good elite coach.
That's what I was going to say. The thing I think that's most indicative of how football fans feel about it is the majority of neutrals almost wanted City to win the league because it meant nothing to them. If Arsenal won it, then the fans had bragging rights. If Liverpool won it, then the fans had bragging rights. No one cares if Man City win it because there's always going to be that caveat of, well, you won it for a reason. Even as a United fan, let's be honest, you'd rather City won the league than Liverpool this year. Because really, you can always say, well, City have won it, but it doesn't really matter. They've done it because of the money. And they've almost separated themselves as a different part of the conversation and competition where actually neutrals don't value their success the same as you would if it had been Arsenal or Liverpool.
Yeah, fair comment.
It's quite telling.
Go on.
I think it's quite telling the response you're seeing from some United fans are actually a little bit torn whether they want Arsenal or City to win the league because they've always had that rivalry with Arsenal. And
I respect Arsenal though for what they've achieved. I don't respect City.
But I think that says a lot about how even United fans feel numb to it.
And the difference is, if Arsenal do it or Liverpool do it, then you look at it and go, well, why are my club not doing it? If Arsenal or Liverpool won the league this year, United fans are going, that's where we should be. When City 100%. Win it, United fans go, well, yeah, we can't do that.
Yeah, they're on a different level, and it's not earning the unanimous respect of everybody within football, is it? And that's kind of the tale. But for me, I think Pep Guardiola is an elite coach and is the best of his kind, and he's only ever managed elite clubs. So there's always this accusation that he's always had a kind of a trophy-laden season handed to him on a plate. I think that is unfair to Guardiola. There was a time where Alex Ferguson earmarked him as his successor, tried to woo him to become United manager, but he had a sabbatical, didn't he, after his Barcelona stint because he was just exhausted. He ends up at City because they get in there first and recognise that there's a project that he can actually facilitate. He's probably the only coach, I think, who could have facilitated this level of success, apart from maybe Carlo Ancelotti, who has got that kind of experience dealing with elite players and elite competitions. There's not many would come close to Guardiola's achievement in that respect. So I have to kind of tip my hat to him as a coach and say he's one of a kind. And the players he's put together in this team are one of a kind. And it's kind of tough to say, but you have to acknowledge that as well, don't you, really?
Yeah, the previous Man City managers all had the financial backing when they were there, like Mancini, Pellegrini. They all had the money, but got limited success in comparison to Guardiola. So absolutely, there's still a massive managerial achievement there. So you have to give him his credit.
Should we talk about Arsenal then? And obviously they've had a successful season. Even though they didn't win the title, they were in control for so long. You talk about the margin of error in the Premier League, and Liverpool will attest to this, that you have to be 90 plus points to win the league. And in this situation, it was 92 was the winning total. So the level of almost perfection that Arsenal had to achieve to get to the title is insane. And you could say Aston Villa tripped them up by doing the double over them in some ways, but there's so many moments in the season where Arsenal could have picked up 3 points and didn't. And that's the margin, isn't it? But Arsenal will look back on this season with a real degree of, there's progress being made, won't there, Miles? And that next season could and should be different.
Yeah, so do you know what? Obviously, I watched this game in Finsbury Park, which is not far from Arsenal territory, obviously, and it was completely full of Arsenal fans. And it was nice on the way to the game. I cycled to a pub to watch it, and the streets were just filled with Arsenal fans. And I would say there wasn't optimism, but there was joy and hope. And I think that is there in recognition of no matter what happened yesterday, they can hold their heads high and go, this was a fantastic season. It's out of our hands if City just aren't Man City. I think if they'd lost yesterday, even if they'd lost the title, I still think there would have been more of an ill feeling towards how it had finished. So for them to get the result, keep themselves in that touching distance, it is a real sign of progress. There'll be moments in the season they'll look back at with regret. You talk about the losses to Villa, that's one thing. The loss to Fulham was huge. Those games, it really does come down to that, doesn't it? Because City aren't likely to do that. And I think their points tally would have won the league in 11 of the last 20 Premier League seasons. So they are there. They are there, really. Problem is they're joined there by someone else who was just slightly better. I don't think that should take away from what an achievement Arsenal have had this year.
No, they need to build upon it, definitely. And I think Mikel Arteta's onto something. I think he's still got to tweak his formula and make maybe a centre-forward signing. I think we've agreed in the past, because as good as Kai Havertz has been in that false nine, they are missing that goal-scoring threat, I think. And it's them margins, I think, that can make the difference, Dave, don't you? And Arsenal will look at next season. There's definitely an opportunity to challenge. I think Rodri said, didn't he, in the celebrations after Man City won, that when Arsenal played City in the last game, they got a point, but they played for a point, and the difference is City wouldn't do that. Do you think it is as simplistic as that winning mentality isn't quite there yet for Arsenal?
Yeah, I was just about to mention that. I thought that's quite fascinating. Neil Sealsham also mentioned they dropped points to Liverpool. Obviously, in some of the top games at the top of the league, you have to beat your rivals, and I think that's just something that they struggle to do. I don't know whether it's mentality, because he mentioned them having the right mentality, but I think being more ruthless. But I think it's also about having the know-how. Let's be honest, they haven't really been in this situation over the last few years. I think they need players of more of a clinical nature, and I think in those games, like even Rodri mentions that Man City game. Let's be honest, there's managers that played that way. Like, for instance, Sir Alex Ferguson, we played many an ugly game away against some, top teams, top four candidates, managed to win a game, managed to score a vital goal when we're on the back foot. And I think that's something that probably Arsenal need to learn to do.
Yeah, I think they took 4 points off City this season, and that should have been enough to really swing it for them. And that's where the frustration lies, really, isn't it, Miles? That they haven't picked up all the points available to them on the majority elsewhere.
Yeah, it's going to be hard to get 4 points or more from City next season as well, isn't it? Like it's a rare achievement, so they'll see that as a bit of a missed opportunity. Do you know what's funny? If you put the top four in a little mini league against each other, Villa got the most points because they got 6 points from Arsenal, 3 against City, and 1 against Liverpool. So they have more points against the rest of the top four than any of the other teams. And Arsenal will see that as one area that they maybe could have done slightly better in, I think. But we're looking there at trying to find where Arsenal lost it. And I don't really think we're going to find it. Last season, we talked a lot about, have they bottled it? The season before, did they bottle the top four? This year, they didn't bottle it. They went on an incredible run in the new year. Yeah. They were scoring goals for fun, and there's all this talk of them needing a striker. They got 91 goals in the league this year. But then Man City get 96. And that's the fine margin. It's not that Arsenal did anything wrong. It's just Man City got everything perfect after a certain point.
I'll tell you from my point of view where I think Arsenal lost the league. When Son was clean through on goal against Man City last week.
I think a lot of Arsenal fans feel the same.
Oh, honestly, the chance couldn't have been better. And I think Arsenal fans must have been thinking this is it. And I think there's certainly City fans who were thinking, yeah, that's it, title's over, because Son's the one you wanted to put that away. What a weird game that was. I might talk about that quickly, Dave, actually. And Tottenham obviously finishing outside the top four. And that game was provoked a reaction from Ange Postecoglou, didn't it? That we've seen from the likes of Conte in the past. And, that Spurs have got this small-time mentality where they just don't want Arsenal to win, and at any cost, they're seemingly top four as well. Do you kind of agree with that? Do you think Spurs are stuck in this small-team mentality?
I don't think his frustration's just boiled over from that. I think there was also, apparently, I saw a rumour that apparently a staff member mentioned about putting the under-18s team out to play in the week, and apparently he didn't find it amusing at all. I think there's certain things, and he mentions the foundations. I think it goes deeper than just the squad personnel. I think it's all around the club.
It's Levy. Surely,
it is, yeah.
It's 3 managers in a row now.
So
they must be talking about him.
Could you see him leaving over it? I think
not yet.
No.
Just a huge lack of ambition, I think, and that's the frustration. So, I mean, you look at the start of the season, you'd say that Spurs would be happy with 5th, but I'm sure they're frustrated to miss out on the Champions League, especially when you consider, that Villa have dropped points as well. It could have been so different. Let's talk about Villa quickly, shall we? Because obviously, top four celebrations of celebrating qualifying for the Champions League or for the European Cup for the first time in 40 plus years, isn't it? Which is a massive achievement, and I think it's where they are as a club now. They are the fourth best team in England quite comfortably, Miles. That seems quite a proud thing to say. Now let's look over the result against Crystal Palace, because you kind of almost predicted they were going to get hammered on the final day after the level of celebration they went through. But
I mean, hammered all week. I think that's the problem.
Fourth place is massive, mate, isn't it? It's a huge achievement.
Yeah, unbelievable. And for Emery as well, I think there's no doubt in my mind that he's manager of the season for that as an achievement, because Villa, you think a couple of years ago, we were fighting off relegation on the last day of the season with that point against West Ham. To be here already, whilst also contending with European football this year, while Tottenham weren't, it's just incredible. And the joy that the whole fan base feels. I'll be honest, this is the best season we've had in my lifetime. It's incredible to watch. It's our highest points total in a 38-game season. The Premier League, it's the most goals we've scored. They're excellent to watch. Emery has got all the fans on side. The players are incredibly likeable and are doing everything they can. There's improvements to be made, definitely, because the next gap is trying to catch up with Liverpool. That was 14 points it ended up being between the two. So there's things to be done. And of course, if you want to compete in the top European competition, you have to treat it with the serious nature that it needs and not just look at it as a big day out. And I really hope they're going to do that. They've got enough in place now to make me think they will. Obviously, the new kit deal has been announced today with Adidas, which we knew about a while ago. That's huge for us, absolutely. They look ambitious in the transfer market. There's talk of them looking at Michael Elise, who had a great audition at the weekend for us. It also randomly looks like we signed Ross Barkley today, which I can't believe, but I'll take it. It's good depth. And Villa will have a plan now of how they target this properly, because there's the right people at the club making the right decisions. There's people that have got a plan and infrastructure in place. Emery is at the heart of it. Monchi's behind him. And it is a very well-run football club now, and that's why we're breeding success from it.
I think that kind of organic growth to success, I know there's been investment, but seeing a club gradually get to that level is more of an achievement, I think, than City winning the league for the fourth time in a row. And that's not being bitter or salty. That's just me saying that they've, again, got the talent ID of a club that is going places. So to get Emery in the first place, we said, is fantastic. The calibre of players has gradually got better that they've signed. Pau Torres, we said at the time, was such an insane signing for them. Yuri Tielemans as well. I didn't think they were that level. I think almost they've outgrown the level of Yuri Tielemans, and they're looking beyond that now, even though he's a great player. But Villa in the Champions League, Dave, is going to be an exciting prospect, isn't it? And I guess the concern for me is they're going to go down the route of Newcastle and maybe have one great season, but absolutely exhaust themselves doing it. I suppose it depends what kind of investment they can have, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's there've been absolutely no shame of in that kind of season, to be honest. And in a way, it will be a transitional season because Villa aren't used to being in this position. I think it will be about balancing and competing on all fronts. And for me, I think for you, Miles, as well, especially just to see Villa have a decent cup run, because they've been pretty bad in the English Cup competitions for a while now. But I think, you mentioned some of the players that they've managed to attract, and obviously their recruitment's been top notch. Obviously, we'll speak more in depth in our upcoming reviews and what obviously each team will need. But I think there's opportunities there to improve even further, and what a chance just to play in the top level of European competition. I think it's going to be crazy and just very surreal to watch, to be honest.
It's mental when you consider that some of the players that we've got now will be playing in the Champions League, and you talked about the recruitment and Villa spending money. True to a degree, but remember, Matty Cash, Ezri Konsa, Ollie Watkins, all signed from Championship clubs to Aston Villa.
True.
Tielemans was free. John McGinn was 2 million. Louise, I think, was 12. Kamara was free. Ramsey's an academy product. So the core of that team, they've grown together, and that is another one where Emery has coached these players to become far better players. Look at Leon Bailey, the season he's had. The development of him under Emery this year is sensational, because I think a lot of Villa fans were ready to cut their losses with him, and then we've come into this year and he probably ran Watkins close for our player of the season. So there is definitely a model there that is getting the best out of players, and we will need to invest in the summer, but don't forget, we've still got Buendia to come back. We've got Mings to come back, Ramsey, Kamara, all to come back. There's depth already there that we haven't even seen this season, really.
True. Well, a great end to a great season. Well, a poor end to a great season, I should say, losing 5-0 to Crystal Palace. Yeah. But as you say, kind of expected considering the level of celebration. But let's just have a word on Crystal Palace, who have had an equally great finish to the season. In fact, in terms of form, I think they're the most informed team in the Premier League for the last few weeks, which was crazy. And they finished 10th in the end. And I thought that position in the table was going to be where you'd see the likes of Wolves or Brighton. They've kind of trailed off, and Palace have kept this consistency under Oliver Glasner. And okay, yeah, the finish here by winning 5-0 against Villa was helped by Villa just not really being present. But Mateta got a hat-trick, Eze got 2, could have had more. Elise was absolutely on fire and central to it. Dave, there's a makings there of a really competitive team next season, isn't there?
Absolutely, and I just hope it isn't curtailed in a way, because I think I've seen rumours that Dougie Friedman's apparently agreed to go to Newcastle, which would be a real shame, to be honest, because they've made some real progress. But you're right, I think it would have been really interesting to see if Glasner had gone there a little bit earlier this season, just how far this Palace team could have gone, because they've been one of the best teams to watch, to be honest, since he's come in. And I don't think they get the credit. If you look at the quality of the goals in these games, although Villa afforded them so much space in behind, Mateta's finishes were ridiculous. So good.
So clinical.
I think got to give him a bit of praise, because that's 16 league goals. I think in his previous 3 seasons, I don't think he even scored over 10 goals in total. I can tell you, which is ridiculous.
He got 11 in his first 80 for Crystal Palace, and then I think he's got 13 in his last 11 under Glasner.
Wow,
that's some transformation. Do you know what I mean? That
ridiculous.
That a coach can come in. You can see why Bayern looked keen to apparently bring him in. Apparently, they were quoted of paying 100 million compensation or something ridiculous.
Bayern will take anyone they can get at this rate, though.
Well,
I saw Thomas Frank today.
Say that again. What, linked to
I saw
Bayern?
them linked with Thomas Frank today. Yeah.
Well, I saw them actually. Apparently, the players are pleading for Thomas Tuchel to stay. Apparently, he's more popular than we realise at Bayern. So, let's not take the spotlight off Crystal Palace, because since they lost to Manchester City at the start of April, they've beaten Liverpool, they've beaten West Ham, they've beaten Newcastle, they've beaten Manchester United, they've beaten Wolves, they've beaten Villa. You know, the teams they're beating on this run-in have been really impressive. And there's been a gear change there, hasn't there, somewhere? I'll ask you, Miles, actually, on this one. What has been that gear change from Glasner? Because when he first joined, we watched the first game under him and started analysing the differences. They were subtle, but they were there. He's had a really good run now of embedding his style on his players. What is the difference for you, do you think?
It's funny because actually, if you remember, we did that preview of what Glasner would bring to the Palace. And one of the things I talked about was the system of that front 3 and how they would kind of rotate between them and how that would really suit Elise, Eze and Mateta. And that has exactly come to fruition in a way that I think even Glasner couldn't have estimated how well it's done. Keeping them fit and playing together is huge for them. And they have been outstanding. They've taken to a system so quickly because they're incredibly intelligent footballers with excellent movement and vision. And that's exactly what Glasner would want from his forward players. Plus the addition of Wharton in January. He's been sensational. And let's be honest, Palace will have a job on their hands to keep hold of all of these players. I think they might cash in on one of them, and it's probably most likely Elise, because I think he's got the buyout in there. There's already talk that Villa are looking really heavily at bringing him in for Champions League, which would be incredible. But Palace will look at that and trust that Glasner will be able to either keep hold of these players and convince them that another season with them could help them kick on even further, or replace him and build, because they look like they're really on the up now, Palace, and that's what the fans wanted. They all respected Hodgson massively and appreciated what he did, but how many times have we seen Palace's owners try and be ambitious in the managerial market, try and kick on and do something a bit different and it not work? Well, this one looks like it will. It didn't quite get there for Vieira. Frank de Boer was the most ridiculous thing we've ever seen, but here we are. They've gone again. They've brought in an exciting coach, and this time the football is paying off, and that's excellent for Palace fans. They deserve it. They're great to watch, and what an end to the season for them as well. They'll have probably the most optimistic kind of trajectory out of any fans in the league, I think, based on how they've been performing lately. Let's go through a few more other results before we kind of dig into some of the major managerial departures in the league as well, which are definitely worth talking about. Brentford 2, Newcastle 4, great kind of finish to their season and dispelling any chance that United had of finishing above them in the league. United beat Brighton 2-0 for Roberto De Zerbi's final game.
Forest finished their season on a high, beating Burnley 2-1. Chelsea beat Bournemouth 2-1. Liverpool beat Wolves 2-0 in their final game under Klopp. Luton 2, Fulham 4, just to confirm their relegation was a mathematical impossibility. And Sheffield United 0, Spurs 3. So let's start with Brighton United, shall we, Dave? Roberto De Zerbi in his final game. I'd like to say it came out of the blue, but it's not really a surprise that De Zerbi's leaving Brighton, isn't it? Because their ambitions seem to be quite different. And I mean, a year ago, De Zerbi was like hot property, wasn't he? But the season Brighton have had, I don't think that's as much of the case now as it was. But you can see the relationship deteriorating. And I think it was down to signings mainly, wasn't it? Because obviously Brighton's talent ID is very different to what De Zerbi wanted. Brighton either wanted unknowns with loads of talent or real veterans that have got proven experience like James Milner and Danny Welbeck, but nothing really in between. And obviously you want ready-made if you're a manager. You want somebody to come in and fit into your team that's at their peak. But that's expensive. So De Zerbi was kind of understandably frustrated in some ways, but where does he go next and where did Brighton go next? Can you see a return for Graham Potter?
I'll be surprised, to be honest. I don't think Potter will be looking to return because I think he's looking to move on in his career and obviously make that next step. I think that'd be a sideward step for him. But also, it is interesting, and I do sympathise a little bit for De Zerbi this season because he's actually struggled. They've struggled with injuries at times. I mean, you look at obviously Matoma. He's had a bit of a really difficult season in terms of staying fit and his injuries. He was an absolute key player for them. Let's not forget, obviously, really good season last year. And they've got a lot of young players here now. They've got a lot of potential, but they're not quite the finished article. And you've seen that in times. I mean, even in this game, absolutely dominated United in that first half. Just couldn't score. Yeah. In terms of their style of play, they're one of the best teams in the league in terms of transitioning and playing their football the way that they do. But I do feel as though it is difficult to evolve as a team if your team is littered with players with potential. Obviously they've got a couple of experienced players in there, the likes of Lallana, obviously James Milner, but I think when you're trying to make that next step, it is difficult and you need some seniority in there to be able to take you to that next step.
I guess we'll talk about Brighton, in the end of season reviews, Miles, but based on De Zerbi's understandable frustrations, do you think he's been unrealistic about Brighton's stance in world football at the minute, or even the Premier League? Because it's difficult to make that break into the top 8, the top 6, isn't it? The gap and the chasm is huge, and it does take investment. Do you think they're on the right path? Do you think they're still on the right path? Because Europe really knocked the stuffing out of them to an extent, didn't it?
I definitely think they are, and I think actually this is the perfect time for De Zerbi to move on. I think he's actually been quite smart with it. Because the reason I say that is I think he has realised there's only so much he will do at Brighton. And if he had another season like this, then we would be talking about him very differently. Whereas right now, the managerial market seems to say there's a lot of big jobs going, particularly in Italy. And there aren't a lot of candidates for them. So really, the big managers on the market right now are Mourinho, Conte, Tuchel, Allegri. All of them kind of come with this idea of, are they really people you want at the club right now? Are they the sort of characters you want? De Zerbi, on the other hand, has gained this massive kind of cult following in English football, particularly with the Brighton fans, but across the way. And I wonder if leaving right now means his stock is at the highest it would be at. And if he'd given it another year, then the top jobs are not available to him. Now, he could go and get the Napoli job now. He could get the Juve job or the Bayern job. Is he getting that in a year's time if he stays at Brighton and doesn't have a successful season with them? Probably not. I think there is a question to be asked about Brighton when you consider the money they got for Caicedo, McAllister, Cucurella over the last couple of years.
Definitely.
Obviously, they brought João Pedro in last year. That was a big signing. But there is money in the club, and the new manager will definitely have the opportunity to invest some of it, I would imagine. And I did say last week you could see De Zerbi moving on, and that maybe the right sort of profile for Brighton would be to look at either Rob Edwards or Kieran McKenna and then try and build something else. I've also seen Vincent Kompany be linked, which I think is quite interesting. They want that next generational manager, the young manager that's going to come in with fresh ideas and kind of build with Brighton's mould, who won't necessarily expect hundreds of million in their first season, but earn it. And I wonder if we'll see a lot of talk about Edwards in particular, and then, of course, McKenna.
He's given a really good account of himself in the Premier League in this season, hasn't he? And it shows the kind of, I don't know, team building and people management skills that I think Brighton want to see, because they're a club that's built on a foundation of it being a family and it being that kind of feeling of a club where it's different to any other club in the Premier League. And that kind of romance is there for them to an extent, because they've come out of nowhere, established themselves in the Premier League and become a really well-run football club. And when you think about the fact they were facing Ajax in Europe this season and beating them quite convincingly, they've come a long way. I think Brighton fans need to kind of acknowledge that they're still at that level. They've had a blip, I think, but it sounds like they're having a similar talent ID for managers as they are for players, where they are young and up and coming with a vision, but might outgrow the club eventually. I think that's kind of smart though, Dave, don't you? Because it will take them to a certain level, but won't bankrupt them at the same time.
Absolutely. I think as long as they've got those footballing staff within the club, who've done so well for them, obviously, over the years, and their way of recruiting's been astonishing. We liken them similar to who we thought were well run. We're Leicester City, up until they obviously had financial penalties, it seems, in the upcoming season. Let's be honest, recruited very, very well over the years and really unearthed some real talent, which Brighton have been able to do. But I do think it is the right move at the right time. And what is quite interesting, actually, now we're all of a sudden in this situation where there are a lot of big clubs looking for new managers. But there's a lot of unknown there, because there's a lot of young talented coaches, the likes of Motta, Amorim, obviously De Zerbi, but they're untried really and untested at bigger clubs. So I think it's quite fascinating, really, and I think that's where clubs are struggling actually to identify the right manager and being quite careful of making the right decision at the right time.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about a club that's been forced to find a new manager, and that's Liverpool, who obviously announced today that Arne Slot has been confirmed as their new manager to take over from the outgoing Jurgen Klopp. And in the game against Wolves at Anfield, there was a huge outpouring of emotion to say goodbye to him, understandably, because he changed the culture completely of the club. And there are some people saying that he didn't win as many trophies as he probably should have done. But again, this is the era of Manchester City, isn't it? And they did really well to run them so close so many times. But again, Liverpool at the time of Klopp taking over, Miles, were a completely different proposition to what they are now. And I think that's the kind of legacy he's got. And that's kind of what the whole day was about, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, and it's rare on this podcast that we give Klopp or Liverpool their flowers, to the point where I'm going to say, don't even ask Dave a question about this, because we'll get some angry Liverpool fans that listen. No, it's been an incredible time for Liverpool under Klopp. You can see what it's meant to the fans to have him there. He brought charisma, he brought excellent football, he's invested well in the squad and brought some excellent players through. I think you'll look at the likes of Salah, Alisson, Van Dijk as some of the club's greatest Premier League players of all time, of course. Yeah. And he's been able to develop them into that. Like, Salah was excellent in his last season at Roma, but nowhere near the level we saw him get to. The same could be said of Alisson, Van Dijk at Southampton. Klopp has managed to make all of those players into absolutely world-class, phenomenal footballers, and there's a lot to be said for that. I think he would have liked this season to have been a bit more stable from the get-go, for him to have a real last tilt at the title. And it looked like they were in the conversation kind of unexpectedly for a really long time in the season. But when you consider the upheaval they had in the summer and the kind of regenerating that midfield, he's done well to kind of give Slot a better foundation than I think many were anticipating. McAllister, for example, has settled in excellently now. Looks like a sensational midfielder again that we knew he could be. So there are definitely some of the foundations there. It's just going to be some very big boots to fill, isn't it? And I do wonder whether Slot is up for the task, but Klopp definitely seemed to back him on the final day. So that was nice of him to go.
Well, it's like you were saying, Dave, the struggle clubs have at finding a calibre of manager and also a philosophy and a culture that's going to fit in with what they've already got. It's really hard. And for an elite club like Liverpool, who have had it really lucky with Jurgen Klopp, because he seemed like the perfect sort of marriage between a manager and a character and a vision, and a club that really needed that at the time they did. And that's rare to find that suddenly happen and click straight away. So there's going to be an element of, I think, uncertainty for Liverpool going into this new season, isn't there? And Slot's got a really difficult job, hasn't he? And Liverpool fans will probably be quite critical of him quite early on. But is that going to be something that you think Liverpool struggle with to hit the ground running maybe next season? And there's talk of obviously the likes of Van Dijk and Salah, who are very Klopp players, maybe not playing quite the same under a new coach.
I think we were a little bit critical of the decision to announce Klopp's departure so early in the season. But I think what it has allowed Liverpool to do is work in the background. And actually, they've recruited their new coach fairly quickly, really. And it's been quite a seamless transition. They've obviously done their homework on him, and fair play to them. It's quite a courageous decision for them, really, to have moved this quickly. So it would be interesting to see what they're doing. I think there'll be some moving on of probably the old guard. I think we're all waiting to see what will happen with Salah. I think that's one that we'll keep an eye on. But like Miles has said, some of the players that they've brought in and the recruitment over the years has been great. So I can't see why they can't kick on. I think it will be another transitional season. I don't know whether they'll be ready to make a title charge again, to be honest.
I feel like it's a real opportunity for Aston Villa now. They can look at that third place and go, maybe we can climb higher. Seriously, I think Villa are in a great position to take advantage of Liverpool, especially having that season of transition, because Villa are on the up, mate.
I think it's more likely that Newcastle and Chelsea are looking at it than Villa if we're competing in the Champions League. I mean, both you boys can testify of how great it can be to bring in quite a fancy manager from the Dutch league to your club to try and build for the future. I'm sure you both have got good words of encouragement for Liverpool on that front.
Well, I think, like Dave was saying, trying to find the right coach that isn't already an elite, proven coach and hasn't got a problematic kind of history with the clubs he's been at is difficult, because those that are available aren't always the right fit. And Liverpool are now a club that need a certain character and a certain charisma to match that. I don't know much about Arne Slot's character. I've never seen him in interviews. I don't really know what kind of philosophy he has as a football manager, because I'm quite ignorant to the Dutch league. So I wait with bated breath, really, to see what kind of approach he brings to Liverpool and how he moulds a team of players that is quite well established into something that suits him, but was also not too big a change, because I think Liverpool can't afford to be too drastic, Dave, in some ways, can they? No,
I think that's it. And I think they'll obviously have analysed that. And in terms of the kind of Liverpool, the kind of football that Liverpool play, I think it will be quite a similar sort of style of football. And like I say, it's going to be a massive change for him. Let's be honest. And we've seen a lot of managers, footballers come from the Dutch league and find it really difficult in the Premier League. So let's see what happens. It'll be nice to see how they play and any changes they make in pre-season. I think that will kind of give us an idea of that'll be key. Definitely.
Well, all changing the Premier League for next season. I can't wait to see how the summer plays out. Obviously, David Moyes has had his last game as West Ham manager. We might have seen the last Premier League game, at least for Erik ten Hag or even Mauricio Pochettino. There's still uncertainty about both of them. However, we've still got the FA Cup final, Dave, to look forward to, if you can call it that. Maybe we can upset the odds, who knows? We've still got the European finals to look through. And all through this summer, we'll be analysing how each of the teams in the Premier League has done and do a review of every team from the top down. And we look forward to that too. But also the Euros. There's a lot to look forward to, isn't there?
I can't wait.
I'm already wishing it away. I can't wait for us to get started, man.
I had to have one final celebration of Villa today before the England shirt comes on.
Honestly, don't blame you. What I'm trying to say, listeners and viewers, is stick around. We've got a lot to look through for this summer on the podcast. Please do hit subscribe, hit like, hit follow, whichever platform you're listening on, watching on. Really helps support our growth. And we cannot wait for a summer of really eventful changes in the Premier League and in the international scene as well. It's going to be an exciting one. But until then, until we talk next week about our regular rundown of all the European games, thanks, guys. Speak to you soon.